Middle management. That phrase brings up all kinds of different thoughts from people who may experience it, from teachers with students and department chairs to department chairs with teachers and administrators to administrators with teachers, department chairs, and central administrators. Middle management. It can often have a negative connotation. Hey, everyone. Dr. Jones here with another episode of Seeing to Lead, a podcast designed to help leaders solve the problems they face every day. This episode's a little different. It's a cross post. I was a guest with Chris Dodge on Karen Dudek-Brannon's podcast, DeFacto Leaders. And it didn't take long for Karen to ask both of us the question about middle management and how relationships are formed and managed in such situations. So I'm not going to take a long time introducing this because I think you're really going to enjoy some of the topics we cover in this free-flowing conversation. That said, as always, I ask that you subscribe wherever you listen and leave an honest rating and review so Seeing to Lead can continue to grow and offer value to many different people. Now, let's get to getting better on this week's Seeing to Lead. Dr. Chris Jones here, and welcome to Seeing to Lead, a show designed to help leaders increase their ability to effectively support, engage, and empower their staff through intentional practices so that they create an environment where everyone reaches their greatest level of success. On Seeing to Lead, communication rules the day as we hear voices from both teachers and leaders in an effort to examine perspectives, highlight misunderstandings, and provide steps to ultimately bridge the gap between what teachers need and provide through thoughtful dialogue. This show is about amplifying voices, creating understanding, and providing information to help everyone continually improve. I want to personally thank you for taking the time. Now, let's get to getting better.
This is Dr. Karen, and you are listening to the DeFacto Leaders Podcast on the B Podcast Network. And welcome to episode 173. A while back, I heard someone refer to school administrators and other public sector leaders as middle managers, and it really hit home for me. As I've transitioned through different roles in my career, I've gotten into the trap of thinking that when I achieve the next step, I'll finally have the influence I want. But in my experience, telling myself that I'll be satisfied with the level of impact that I can make when I reach the next step is a recipe for disappointment. In reality, I don't think I'll ever be able to fix all the things I want to fix, and I'm slowly coming to terms with that and learning to pick battles that are worth fighting. As I've talked with others who've transitioned to different administrative roles, this seems to be a common challenge faced by people in middle management positions. That's why I invited Dr. Chris Jones and Chris Dodge to episode 173 of DeFacto Leaders to talk about what it's like to be a middle manager in public sector systems like the schools. Chris Dodge has been a lead learner in elementary school settings for 10 years and is currently the principal at Thorndike Road School in Worcester, Massachusetts. Most notably, in 2014, he led the Dexter Park School in Orange, Massachusetts, to become the Massachusetts Department of Education appointed innovation school, awarded for its inclusionary practice work. Aside from the role as principal, he's served as DESCE's principal teacher and advisory cabinet, Commissioner Riley's return to school teaching and learning work group during COVID, as well as the MSAA executive board. He has been published in numerous blogs and publications such as Rogue Leader and Stop Series, 100 No-Nonsense Things Teachers and Leaders Should Stop Doing, and is featured in podcasts such as Seeing to Lead and Becoming a Principal, as well as DeFacto Leaders. He's passionate about supporting and mentoring teachers and educators, and he's a consultant with Seaside Educational Consultants and an adjunct instructor at Assumption University in Massachusetts. Dr. Chris Jones has been an educator in Massachusetts for 22 years. His experience in the classroom has ranged from 8th to 11th grade, working in an urban setting. A portion of this time was spent opening a high school division for an expanding charter school. He has just finished his 15th year as a building administrator. He's also the vice president of the MSAA. And true to his why of improving the educational experience for as many people as possible, he's currently the principal of Whitman-Hanson Regional High School in Whitman, Massachusetts. He is the author of Seeing to Lead, a book that provides strategies for how modern leaders can and must support, engage, and empower their teachers to elevate student success. His education includes a bachelor's from Bridgewater State University, a master's from Salem State University, and a doctorate from Southeastern. He currently resides in southeastern Massachusetts with his wife, Mary, and 2 boys, Tommy and Scotty. In this conversation, we talked about questions like, what is it like to be a decision maker who reports to other decision makers? Are there times when it's been difficult to give staff direction because you were waiting on a decision that was over your head? What is the best way for people on the front line, like teachers and therapists, to provide their school leaders with information that they can bring to their leadership to help move initiatives and decisions along? How do you know when to escalate something versus try to handle it on your own? When bringing questions or concerns to leadership, how can you provide enough information that you give adequate context without getting in the weeds and overwhelming them? Definitely check out the show notes to learn all the places you can go to connect with both of them, as well as my previous episodes with both of them. So that includes episode 138, Increasing Access to Instructional Programs in Rural Districts with Chris Dodge, and episode 119, Teacher-Centered Leadership with Dr. Chris Jones. And also I've linked to the DeFacto Leaders podcast feed where I have cross-published my episode with Dr. Jones on his podcast, Seeing to Lead, which is called Seeing to Lead, Seeing the Whole Staircase. Finally, we talk a lot about leadership in this episode, and there's a lot of talk about how do we learn to escalate things? How do we learn to empower people? How do we learn to put systems in place that allow people enough guidance, but also give them enough flexibility that they can be creative in the way that they serve students? And a lot of that can be done by putting some of the programming in place that I show you how to do in the School of Clinical Leadership, my program that helps related service providers develop a strategic plan for putting executive functioning support in place in collaboration with their school teams. Obviously, this can be a challenge if you're somebody who is not in an official administrative position and you have to figure out ways that you can engage with your leadership and collaborate with them as well as the other people on your team to put some of these things in place. A lot of it starts with developing your own understanding so you know exactly what to ask for, and that's what I show you how to do in the program. To learn more about how to become a member, you can go to drkarendudekbrandon.com/clinical leadership. Now, please enjoy this episode with Dr. Chris Jones and Chris Dodge. Today, I am joined by Chris Jones and Chris Dodge, returning guests for a dual interview. So welcome to the show, guys. Thanks for being here.
Well, thanks for having us. This is going to be a good conversation.
Yeah. So I think people can refer back to your previous episodes, and we'll definitely link to those. But can you guys give a quick introduction, each of you, before we get going?
Yeah, I'll even let Chris go first.
Oh, I knew it.
Chris.
Hey, everybody. My name is Chris Dodge. I am an elementary principal. I've been an elementary principal for 10 years. Currently in the Worcester Public Schools, which is an urban district in Massachusetts, one of 35 elementary schools in the district. Previous to that, I've been in the Orange Elementary Schools and Peter Sam Center School, which are out in central western Massachusetts. So I'm happy to be here. Now it's your turn, Dr. J.
Yeah, there we go. Hey, everyone. My name's Chris Jones, and I am a high school principal. Currently, I'm at Whitman-Hanson Regional High School. I've been a high school principal for about 8.5 years now. Been in education for 23 years. And I'm interested in making sure education moves in the direction it needs to. And I'm pretty passionate about educational change and shaping the future of what our kids and families and educators receive.
Yeah. So many different places we can go. And I'm going to sneakily turn this into a coaching session for myself and take both of your wisdom because we wanted to hit record as soon as possible because, as we were saying before, that always happens that you wish you hit record sooner. But I actually just started a new position back in December, not as a school administrator, as a child welfare administrator, which was a lengthy process, and learning the joys of middle management and public sector leadership and all of that, which is different in child welfare, but there's still a lot of similarities. So yeah, one of the interesting things, I was listening to a podcast a while back from, it was a former special ed teacher who had transitioned to an administrator, was working with a lot of principals. And she made this comment about building principals are middle management. When you're the teacher, you think, oh, the principal's making all the decisions. But actually, when you move into a leadership position and you have people who report to you, you realize that there's a lot of other things where people want you to make decisions for them, but then you have all these other things that are blocking them. So I'm just curious what both of your experience is with that, where you're like people are asking you to make decisions and give guidance, but then sometimes you have to go and ask for those things to be done above your head. I'd love to start with that. That's my life right now.
I don't mind going first. So it's been interesting for me. I'm going into my third year in Worcester Public Schools, which is I went there because I didn't have a lot of urban school experience, and I hadn't been in a district of that size. And I had left a district that was rural and very small. So you're talking, I spent the first 20 years of my career in a district where we had a superintendent, curriculum coordinator, sped director, business manager. That's about it for central office. Now I'm in a district where 25,000 students, a lot more at just such a different structure. And it's still very challenging for me to navigate, I'll be very honest. Whereas when I was in Orange, I had a lot of autonomy, partly because of the leadership of the central office. And in a rural district, you really had to have your hands in everything because you wore so many hats, right? And I go to Worcester where I still have a certain amount of autonomy, but there's definitely a lot more complexity to the work, right? Like principals are what I would say more middle managers than I had been in Orange. Not intentionally, just because of the way the structure is. Right. Yeah. You have so many people at central office. You have autonomy to run your building the way you need to run it. But at the same time, when it comes to resources, professional development, things like that, or even our ability to, as a principal, the people that come in my school, the number of people that want to come and have different roles in the district, like filling them all in on what we're doing and what we're about and what I'd like them to do when they're in our school. It's just the sheer size of the district still really overwhelms me. So I don't come here with any answers, but I would just say it's been eye-opening and a good experience for me too. Because when you are leading a school district of 25,000 people, there's a lot of people that have to have their hands in that. And to make that work unified and move in one direction while also giving schools autonomy to run their buildings is just an enormous task in itself.
Chris, I'm glad you brought up the size aspect of it, because I had a similar experience. I was at a smaller school, a suburban school still, that I was at before I came to a regional school district. It's a larger school. And just that smaller bump in size When I moved, one of the things that I wanted to move for was to see if I could make change at a larger level. And you hear about a lot of innovations that happen with smaller companies, smaller organizations, schools, things like that. But I wanted to try it at a larger school, and I found that it is more difficult at a larger one because you do start to slide into that middle management role. There's a whole lot more trust that's required from your upper levels of leadership that bleed down into your lower levels of leadership. And as a middle manager, there's a lot of responsibility to not say, well, we're doing this because somebody else above me wants to do it. And sometimes people fall into that, but it does put a strain on professional relationships, professional situations when you have so many people with their hands in the pot, so to speak. People get territorial. If there's a miscommunication, it's taken more personally because you run into all these official protocols and so forth.
That trust issue is interesting because it's like I was thinking about that today, actually, as I was thinking about things happening in my current position, and then also just with, just this conversation, because really when people tend to micromanage, I think that sometimes that is about trust. Like you're saying, I don't trust that this is going to get handled if I don't have my hands in it. Or I think for me, it's like you have to trust the people who report to you to do their jobs, but then also you have to trust your leadership to support you if you have to make a difficult decision. And I think that that's one thing that's challenging for me, because sometimes you have to make decisions that upset people. And like, I don't like having those conversations with people, but I am willing to do it because I think that there's times when it just has to happen. And I always feel so much better knowing that I'm going to have support rather than I'm going to do this and like I'm going to get in trouble or something like that. That's always where my head goes, is like, it's going to be hard, but if I have support, I'm good. And that's always how I feel about that kind of thing. So
I think you're right. I think one of the things we both said was trust. And I think the thing about that a lot, because in a smaller setting, I know who to call when I need something, right? Mm-hmm. Like there's only 3 people, and I know who they are. They know me, and so we have that relationship. And I remember my first year in Worcester really struggling with, like, I don't even know who to call if I needed something, right? Like, yeah, I know I have my boss is my first report, but then like there's all these departments, and I just need this thing done. And I have to always check myself and remember that, like, I'm not the only person. There's a lot of other principals in Worcester Public Schools, right? So I'm also had to get very used to not getting that answer I need immediately. But sometimes it's hard when we as principals we report to and are accountable to a lot of people, including our bosses, but more importantly, our staff who we interact with every day, students and their families. Like, we have a lot of entities that we're responsible for. And yet that, like, additional layer sometimes makes it hard because you feel like you need to fix this thing now, right? Like, you have parents that might need your support or need an answer, and they're reminding you. And so that does get tricky. And I know as a new person in the city, even more so challenging, because they don't know me I'm new in the district. So I don't have relationships with other principals or, people I've worked with or teachers. And so, like, that's been an added challenge too. And let's be honest, all that takes time. Like, it doesn't happen overnight. And it takes time and sustainability, right? People have to get to know each other and watch each other and trust one another. Like, when they ask for something, they get, like, there has to be the synergy there, which I would say is also really challenging because you don't get as much FaceTime with these people. You tend to know them by their email signature. And it's it's such a interesting thing,
I work mostly remote now. And so that's that the email signature thing is the truth.
Yeah. I mean, I'm still meeting people. I'm like, oh, I've never met you. I've been here 3 years and I just met you face to face. Like, that's just such a interesting dynamic, so different.
And that makes it hard because everybody's mentioned trust. And, Karen, you started in on the idea of micromanaging and what that looks like. But what I thought I heard hidden in there, and when Chris is talking about the idea of it takes time and it takes relationships, not knowing people, is the ability of individuals in, I would say, high pressure situations, principals, where they do have to answer to their bosses, they have to answer to the families, like Chris was saying, where sometimes it's difficult to not be able to step back and not take it personal. And I think when we get the feelings involved, like somebody might do something above me that has to do with micromanaging. And now suddenly I say, oh, well, they're micromanaging me. They must not trust me. And well, if they don't trust me, what do they think of me? And then that whole cycle starts, whereas if there was a way to just take a step back and not fall into that, they might be micromanaging you for their own personal reasons that has nothing to do with whether or not they trust you.
Right.
And it might be something that they're unaware of. And then that bleeds down to the leader, or in large organizations, the middle manager, so to speak. And then, of course, the middle manager passes those frustrations on to the people below them, and then the people below them feel that way. So once you get that human aspect into it, it becomes really complicated to manage that middle management level position. But relationships definitely have to be key, that take time to build.
Yeah, I think so. What I'm thinking of is like there's a couple conversations that I pay attention to relating like specific examples. So of micromanaging versus what I would say is more scaffolding, because when I was in I'll use response to intervention as an example. So when I was in the schools, it was during the time when we were switching from, we use mostly testing and standardized tests to determine if a student has a learning disability and see if they qualify for special ed services. And then we're making this big paradigm shift and using a different way to evaluate students. And it was really interesting because I was very involved in that process, and I liked being part of that team that was like strategizing and figuring out how things were going to be done. And people reacted differently. Some people were kind of like, just tell me what to do. Like they want that structure and that guidance. To them, it feels secure. It's scaffolding. And I get that a lot from therapists who are like, just tell me what to do. Tell me what to do in this 20-minute session with my students. And then other people are like, why can't you give me autonomy? Why can't you let me decide? And, we can't use these rigid structured protocols. And, I think the truth is somewhere in the middle. But I think that that's kind of interesting, is that sometimes there's preferences that people have as far as like where they are with their professional skills, where they need support, because sometimes it feels like support and sometimes it feels like micromanaging, depending on where that person is. And, maybe issues that both people are having. So
well, that's such an interesting thought, because I think I always think to myself, if I had started in Worcester and then went to Orange, would I feel differently? Right. Mm-hmm. And I think I would.
Yeah.
So I have to think to myself, okay, this is just different. It's not better or worse. It's just, you're not used to this, where I just had a lot more power, not even power, but decision making. Like I had more autonomy because, I created the whole budget for the elementary school because it was my budget, and I went to school committee and presented it. And so like I started with that, and I almost think like, would it be reversed? If I'd started in Worcester and went to Orange, would it be harder? Because I'm thankful I've had all those experiences, but I think you're right. I think we all come to this with, I don't know if it's necessarily just preference. It might just, and it might be
I think a lot of it is, you know? Yeah.
Yeah. Because teachers are kind of like that too, right? And we have to remember that as leaders, that like I have teachers that they want it very black and white. Just tell me what to do. And that sometimes drives me crazy because I'm not that type, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like I don't want to be told what to do. So, but I think you make a good point that we have to be mindful that those preferences exist in our student body and in our staff too.
And sometimes it's skills. You have preferences because you're comfortable with it because those are your skills. You gravitate towards what you're comfortable with.
Correct.
Yeah.
And what you feel you're strong at. And I mean, you bring up a great point, Chris, when you're talking about the middle management piece. Well, the teachers, if you get some teachers together, depending on the teachers, they could decide that they're middle management because they've got the principals above them and they've got the students below them. And how often do they need to do things without input, or they wish they had more autonomy? And sometimes they struggle for that. And like Chris, you brought up a great example where just tell me what to do. I mean, if there's any leader out there that's tried to explain like a crisis lockdown drill to teachers, where they ask every question for every possible scenario that you can't decide because they just want to be told what to do, because there's that aspect of, I want to make sure I do a good job. They're not doing it because they're trying to be a pain. They're not doing it to create arguments, much like a principal that is feeling uncomfortable under central office, maybe because they want that little bit of extra autonomy, or maybe they don't. It's not necessarily to be a pain or to cause trouble. It's because they want to do it right. And they want to make sure that they're doing the right thing by how they see their school and its needs.
So does it come from fear?
Sometimes.
I mean, I think about that. Think about does the profession endorse rule following? And if so, how does that make its way into the classrooms? And if so, what is the impact on that? Is that what we want? Because we can say every day, like, yeah, there's all these different styles. I'm more like, I want autonomy. Some people don't. But is there one that, Chris, you talked about, like preparing kids for the future and what they need? Do we want them to be rule followers, or do we want them to be innovators? And I think we have to, I guess I wrestle with that in my head, because it's great that we have people that want to do well. They want to follow the rules. They just want to be told. But I think that can be dangerous too. I mean,
every day I wrestle with that. Now you're speaking my language, the idea of preparing students and rule following. And you're talking about institutions that promote the idea of following the rules and being told what to do. About institutions that are run by bells on time schedules. And when you talk about something like that, you can often tell the difference in accepting of change to the existing educational structures or institutions. You can tell the difference between a teacher that has come to education as a second profession, that was in the business world beforehand, and one that came out of high school, went right to college for teaching, and went right into teaching. Because they're very indoctrinated. That change becomes harder for them because they're very indoctrinated into the way of school. I mean, some people call it the game of school, but it's the way of school. If I could for a minute, just explain that with a story really quick.
Yeah, go for it.
So this past year, at the end of the year, we did a mental health day at my school. We basically canceled classes for the day. We had some stuff in the morning because we had underclassmen awards, things like that. But we had teachers select something they were passionate about that they wouldn't mind sharing with kids in a non-academic way. Now, I can't talk about this without giving a hat tip to Brian McCann out of Case High School, who did Passion Days. It was kind of like this, but it wasn't. We assigned areas that students went around to and stop. Like, we had craft corner, we had do it yourself, we had yard games, and there were 3 different sessions that students would rotate through, so they get 3 different bites at the apple of their choice. There were, I think, 9 different stations. We were also piloting a new app called MyFlex Learning to actually use with this, because we're starting it full time next year. So we said, hey, let's use it now, see all the bugs, and go from there. The level of anxiety from teachers about this day was through the roof. They were concerned about, well, what do we do when we catch a kid not in their right session? What do we do when a kid hasn't made it to their session or isn't in a session? What if there's a kid wandering? How do we take attendance? How do we do this? How do we just all that rule following, hardcore, old world school stuff. And I actually had to tell them a couple times. And then finally I had to say, look, at a faculty meeting, I stood up in front of the faculty and I said, look, I expect this to fail. Like, let's just wrap our head around that now. Kids aren't going to be where they're supposed to be. Kids are going to be wandering around. There are going to be kids that go out to play yard games, feel they don't want to play yard games, and 4 of them are going to go off and sit up against a tree in the front of the building. Who cares? Let them do what they want. And you should have seen the teachers relax when I told them that. I actually had teachers come up to me afterwards and say that lowered their level of anxiety. Just me telling them, me putting in place, and here's the irony, me putting in place a rule that they could follow that said, let the kids not follow the rules. And then we had a great day and everybody loved it. But the hardest part for teachers, the biggest step, was not picking something that they would oversee, not making stress jars, not making, do-it-yourself woodworking or anything like that. The hardest step for the teachers was, what are we going to do if we find a kid that's not where they're supposed to be? And it took me to tell them, you say, hey, you having a good time? Are you lost? You looking for a place? Don't go over there and say, hey, what place are you supposed to be in? And the day went great. And I had teachers come up and thank me for that and tell me the day went great. But that was the hardest step.
Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
So I love that idea. How or did you have to sell that to your central office, this idea that we're going to do this thing? And if they obviously went for it, but if they didn't, how would you try to persuade them that this is worthwhile? Because I could imagine something like this, like, depending on who is calling the shots, that could be a very different conversation depending on who your boss is.
100%. I got lucky, and we have a chapter for mental health. We're big in supporting mental health. Mm-hmm. A lot of schools are. I'm not saying anything different, but we have a chapter of Active Minds, and Active Minds is a national organization that supports mental health. And they came up with the idea to do something like a field day. They wanted like a field day to remember their elementary school days and to just everybody stop and relax. So they told their advisors, and their advisors mentioned it to the superintendent. And then I got to talking to the superintendent about it, and then I just blew it up because that's what I like to do. And said, if we're going to do a mental health day, let's really do a mental health day.
Yeah.
But you're right. If it was a no, I would have went along the lines of, this is so beneficial to mental health. One, because it lets students unwind a bit. Now, my school also, it was during COVID I did it, but I kept it, and I was in the process of doing it. We don't have midterms or finals. We got rid of midterms and finals.
Right.
And so one of the other pieces to that is that after the grades close, man, that can be a difficult time for teachers with students in front of them in class. Grades are closed. They're there for a couple of days.
Right.
So I also try to fill up the last few days of school with things that if the students want to come to school, awesome. If they don't, they're not missing education or anything like that. But those items have to be somewhat educational as well. Right. So doing something like this, we had everything from crafting, artwork that I can't pronounce that our art teacher put on, to students learning to write music, students writing music, students recording music, students doing woodworking. We were going to be doing blacksmithing, but my kid couldn't make it. My kid was going to come up and do a blacksmithing session. So all kinds of different events that they could do. We had somebody doing painting of miniature figurines and going through the process of sanding and lacquering. And so they were all learning things that students were doing, but it was a laid back atmosphere. Now, you get the educational component, you have the laid back atmosphere component for mental health. What about the relationship building? I mean, there were kids that went into the video game session to play video games and met two teachers that they had no idea were that into video games.
Yep.
And so suddenly they've got that connection. Now you have students walking around the building that know that this teacher does this. And that's pretty cool. I liked that. Yeah. So that's how I would sell it. I would sell it from the relationship aspect and the mental health aspect and throw in, oh yeah, and the kids are learning things to boot.
You could probably put that under social emotional learning too, because that, if you had to tie it to learning standards, you can't, that's one of the things that I'm preaching all the time is that, yes, there are certain things you can front load in a formal educational setting, but if you're doing a social skills group and it's in an academic context, that's not how we socialize. So you're not going to actually get to practice social skills in a social skills group. It's more like, let's prepare for the actual experience that you're about to go have. I mean, that's how you should be using those times. And then go do something like what you just described, or, something else outside of school. I'm going to take a quick break here to talk about the School of Clinical Leadership, my program that helps related service providers put programming in place to support students' executive functioning. In this conversation, we're talking all about the concept of middle management and what it's like when you have to be making decisions in your job about programming, but you also have other decisions over your head that you feel like need to be made, where you need direction, or maybe you feel like they're preventing you from being able to make good decisions for the students or the staff in front of you. So whether you are in an administrative or supervisory role right now, or maybe you're in a direct service provider role and you want to eventually advance to one of those positions where you have the ability to make decisions about programs, then this program is going to be extremely helpful for you. Now, I know that many listening, maybe you're not thinking about being an administrator. Maybe you just want to have more impact in the position that you're in right now. Maybe you're a therapist and you're realizing that the way that things are done in your district or in your building are not conducive to supporting students across the day. And maybe that's really frustrating. It sometimes feels like when you're doing your direct interventions, they're not as effective if students don't have the right support across the day. And when you're in that position, it can be difficult to figure out, how do I plan my own programming for my students that are in front of me right now, but also make an impact on what's going on in my building? That's what I help you do in the School of Clinical Leadership. Because executive functioning is something that can't be adequately addressed by a direct therapy session alone, we really have to get the whole team on board to make sure that the supports are in place across the day. It's really important that there's good team collaboration. And many people don't realize that they can have an impact on the programming in their buildings, even if they're not in an official administrative position, especially if you are in that related service provider role. So I help you navigate all of that in the School of Clinical Leadership by giving you a framework for supporting executive functioning in both direct intervention, as well as how to develop a strategic plan for putting some of those other systemic supports in place. To learn more about the program, you can go to drkarendudekbrennan.com/clinical leadership.
Do you, Dr. Jones, I'm pelleting you with questions tonight.
I'm sweating. The sweat's building up a little bit on me.
Yeah.
You can pass if you need to. But I'm just wondering, because I think about this too for my position. Like, I'm one principal, 35 elementary schools, but I do think I put myself in like leaders positions a lot. And I think it must be super how do we create, because we've talked about this system of schooling, right? And part of the compliance piece, I think, or my assumption is, the bigger you get, the more we feel like we have to control all the parts. So we're moving in like so the ship's moving in the right direction.
Just from an operational standpoint,
Yeah.
it's harder. Like, you have to be more specific about your processes when you're scaling them across all these.
So here you are. I'm just putting myself in our superintendent's shoes. She's got, 40 plus, however many staff members and kids. And she is what I would consider a very innovative superintendent and wants the district to move towards more innovative practices. But that must be super hard when you're so big. Like, where do you even start? And how do you keep everyone moving in the same direction while also endorsing and supporting like autonomy and student choice and authentic engagement? Like, that just must be, I wonder from your perspective, Chris, how do you balance that as a high school principal in your own school? Like, how do you grow? Do they have to be done in tandem? Like, you have to do a mental health day, so everyone but then how do you balance that with letting teachers kind of create an experiment in their practice?
I'm glad you said that. So at the beginning of our conversation, when you were talking before, we were talking about big and small and just operationally how that works. I asterisks and wrote down a note: create a small environment in a big school. And it comes down to being able to put those pieces together and carve those pieces out. So for mental health, we did a book study. I led a book study on mental health, and the people really got great conversation out of it. And we actually started to kind of informally collect some data out of it. So there was a push that we're going to form a mental health committee, and we're going to get some students and put some students on it. And one of the big things that came out, one of the small big things that came out of it was that teachers have complete autonomy to take mental health breaks in their classroom with their students. Read the room, basically. If students are having a tough time that day, or a number of students are having difficulty that day, say, hey, you know what? And you and I have done this, Chris, as teachers in the classroom. This lesson isn't working, so you know what? We're going to trash this and do something else. Do that, but do that as a mental health break. And don't just say we're going to do something else. And in your mind, you're like, yeah, these kids are really spent, they're burnt, or whatever. They need some extra time. Name it, own it, so that the kids hear, I am doing this. We're all doing this as a class for your mental health, because mental health is health. And so you have to take care of that. So different aspects like that. If I do that, I have found in the past that they tend to spread to more teachers, because then I highlight them at faculty meetings, or have teachers highlight them at faculty meetings, which works even better. One other example, an academic example of this. I had a teacher that had looked into wanting to do a deskless classroom. So I got rid of her desks. She asked about it. I said, sure, you want to take that? Go ahead. And when she jumped in, we left some desks around the edges of her classroom, but she went a deskless classroom. Loves it. Found many strengths to it. I go into her class and it's like you're walking into like a courtyard with all the kids, and it's a world language class, and they're all talking in different languages. And then there are times where desks are needed if they want to sit and write or whatever. So they have the desk they can sit in. If a kid doesn't want to stand, they can sit in a desk because that option is there. So it brings in that flexible seating idea. And she found really good things. She found some things she needed to tweak about it, but liked it and has kept it ever since. Well, the teacher next door saw that she did this and had some luck with it. And before you know it, the teacher next door tried to go deskless. Didn't work for her. So she kept half her class desks and got rid of half the other desks. That's great. They're teaching the students the curriculum. And I say it in that way because that order is important. It's about teaching the students the curriculum, not teaching the curriculum to the students. And as long as we do that and take the opportunity to be able to find the best way for the students sitting in front of us to do that, I'm going to support that as a principal. I can't possibly, logistically, it's impossible for me to say, well, she wanted to do a deskless classroom. Everybody does a deskless classroom. I can't do that. And so the equity argument comes up and all of that, but we're still wrapping our heads around that, like experiences in like classrooms. But the best we can do, I think, to not kill these innovative practices is to let these innovative practices happen and then take a little bit of heat for them and see who else is interested to get them to spread.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. And in all the schools I've been, that's kind of how it tends to go. Like, you just have a few people that all they want you to do is say, yeah, and help them do it. Because they've always wanted to do it, but have been afraid to ask, or they didn't get the support. And so in every setting I've been in, that's how change starts. I just always think about, like, you always have that thing on your shoulder, right? Because it's the system that, like, as a principal, you're like, but we got this standardized system and all these kids are going to take this test and that's how we're going to be judged. And like, there's always this thing on your shoulder that's like, but. And I just wonder what it would be like if we didn't have that, because here we are in this, like, we're trying to really push these practices and we want what's best for our teachers and our kids. And we want our teachers to have autonomy and to be able to, like, be who they are and, like, endorse their own style. But then I always go back to, like, but we're in this strange place where we're still in a system that wants uniformity. So it's this, like, odd complex, I guess.
I was listening to this this interview. It was Seth Godin talking to Tim Ferriss, and he was talking about so Tim was like going to Seth for advice on how can I get myself to be motivated to write this book, and Seth went into this whole conversation about constraints and creativity and how it's certain constraints are good for creativity, because if you have chaos, then it's actually distracting, especially for certain students that need boundaries and expectations. Like, I'm sure that in the deskless classroom, there was still boundaries and just an explanation of this is how this is going to work, even though there's a lot of flexibility. So I know that's a very high level, nebulous way of looking at it, but I think that sometimes with the idea of a curriculum and standardizing things, that you can't go completely in the other direction, but at the same time there has to be some fluidity with it. I like to, and this is, I guess, different for me, because I'm a person who there's this curriculum that exists over here, and I've always been the person who is, all right, I'm going to create something that's going to help people access a curriculum. I'm not the person who actually has to teach the students the curriculum, or however you want to phrase it. But I like the idea of a framework, because a lot of the people the clinicians that I work with, they want guidance, but they also want structure, because they know it has to be individualized. So like these broader concepts of these are the skills that we're going to teach, and then we're going to insert the strategies and the worksheets and the curriculum into them, rather than fitting the students into the curriculum. I kind of like to think about it like that. But that to me is the nice balance between constraints, but autonomy at the same time.
I like the way you put that. I think there's a way to do it.
Yeah,
absolutely. But I think sometimes we default to the easy, like schools tend to, like, because of all the amount of stuff coming at us, we just default to, like, the quick and the narrow, because the work you're
curriculum.
Saying, yeah,
that
the work
sounds
you're
easy.
saying, Karen, like a framework is complex work, right? Because then you're talking, we got to get people in a room. We got to define what these things actually mean. What do they look like in a classroom? I'm not saying they're not worthwhile. They definitely are, but I think it's not the norm, right? Because of the way in which we as school staff and administrators, like, all these competing interests. And I think that's what we've been talking about, is, like, how do you balance your own autonomy as a principal and a leader, while also, like, being accountable and responsible to all these competing interests.
That idea of indoctrination is kind of interesting. Dr. Jones, do you think that you have a different mindset because you started off in a different field before you came to education?
I do. Would you like me to think about it for a little while before I answer that, or?
I don't know. I mean, you want to just go with
Let's
it?
hear it.
No, I think there's, I don't like using the word game because I don't want to disrespect the educational system at all, because I think it does a lot of great things for a lot of people. But I think there's pockets that come up where you notice that there is a way to play the educational system. And without getting into the whole idea of grades or who has access to testing prep or anything like that, I think there are really sharp kids, smart kids that don't do well in school because they don't fit the mold of school.
Mm-hmm.
And I think when an institution gets to that point, the institution needs to change. The people don't need to change for the institution. And I think that we've been looking at a different kind of student for years in our schools. And teaching is so different from what it used to be. And then comes this pandemic that really just tips it on its head. And for all the bad that occurred during the pandemic, it did one really good thing. It showed that if pushed hard enough, the educational system could change, could adjust, could adapt. The problem is, it's like a rubber band, right? It got stretched out, but now it went back. Now it's not completely back, and it's never going to go back, but it's not completely stretched to where it needs to be. So I definitely do think this is the way we do things in education, the hallowed halls of academia. And unfortunately, that is not a positive experience for a growing number of students. And you don't have to go far to see that students get out of school, that struggle through school, that just scrape by and get through and become very successful in life.
Mm-hmm.
Because they do it through micro-credentialing. They're late bloomers. They don't really get into learning for the sake of learning until later in life, if ever. Or even more important, they get into learning for skill acquisition rather than the acquisition of just knowledge for the sake of knowledge. And
Can you
that's
talk about
much
what you
more
mean
engaging.
by micro-credentialing?
Sure. If you can, you don't have to have a degree to be in certain fields.
Yeah.
Certain fields you can get micro-credentials in which show, and so here's maybe a poor example, but an example. Your Microsoft Office suite. You can take those tests to be credentialed as a person that knows the Office suite systems. Well, that opens up opportunities for you.
Mm-hmm.
We actually do that we do that in our school as part of one of our innovation career pathways, where those are some of the certifications kids leave high school with. They get them before they're out of high school. Different fields have those that line up. Now, a lot of those are more your technical fields and your computer application fields, but that can open doors for students. So if schools could take the small step of doing that, and I know I say small, it's not all that small with different bureaucracy and things like that, but if schools could take that step and get those credentials in the hands of students, that at least gets them engaged in the process of learning. If students don't see a point to what they're learning for, it's a minority of students that just learn to learn. I mean, students are curious, but they're more curious at a younger level. And as they get older, they really start to search for that meaning of what they're learning. And quite honestly, who wouldn't when, they're broken up into hour-long blocks, they're siloed, and there's very little interdisciplinary work or work attached to the outside world.
I can tell you, as somebody who just went through a job search, that micro-credentialing matters, because a lot of jobs want those certifications. Mm-hmm. They want you to have a degree in something. And then, like, a lot of people get a degree that's kind of broader or not get a degree, and then they stack credentials like that. And sometimes that can be, for certain jobs, they'll say this or the equivalent of like a 4-year degree or the equivalent experience, and then you can stack all those things on top.
So, very powerful stuff.
Would post-pandemic, right, things kind of stretch, like you said, Dr. Jones, but then we always go back to what was comfortable or safe. And I wonder why is that? Because I was really hopeful. Actually, I was probably one of the more hopeful people during COVID because I thought, great, the system's going to drop out. We're going to start from scratch. You know what I'm talking about. This is the time. I don't feel that hopeful anymore. We reverted right back to what we knew. And I'm wondering why. What do you equate to that? Is it because we as educators were brought up in a system where we were taught to play the game? So teachers, by and large, were the people in school that knew how to play the game, felt really good about playing the game, and then wanted to pass the game on to future generations? Is it the system? Is it just what's coming from up above school districts and what's being talked about there? I'm just wondering what your perspective is on that. Or is it all those things, I guess? Because here we are talking about innovation. I don't think innovation ever happens unless it's going to take some drastic shifts. And I thought this was the chance, and we just didn't get there, at least from where I sit.
I think it's a combination of all those things.
Yeah.
And that's not a cop-out. I think there's a lot of that, and I do a lot of work around why. Why am I teaching? And people should have their own personal why that they can say that's meaningful to them. And it's interesting to hear the different whys of why people got into education. And when you're talking to them, that's a place to start, to say, well, okay, now let's have that mirror moment, right? Are you doing that every day? And if you aren't doing that, what's holding you back? And as a middle manager, if I can bring this back to a circle, as their immediate supervisor, even though I have a supervisor myself, and even in a big environment, if I can, or a big school, if I can keep a small environment, it's up to me to find that out and then say to them, if you aren't, what will help you get there? What do you need to do that? What does that look like? Even do a short little vision exercise with them. And then make darn sure that I provide what I can provide to help them do that.
You ask that during job interviews? Because I know some people do that. They say, why did you want to become a teacher, or whatever job they're interviewing for? Do you ask that? And what's the most interesting question that you guys have heard for that? I'm sure you've asked what your why is.
I just interviewed somebody today, and that was a question I asked them, why they got into teaching. And their answer was interesting. And it's an interesting question to ask because, one, there's no right or wrong answer.
Mm-hmm.
And I have to be prepared to say there's no right or wrong answer. Somebody could have said, well, I got into teaching because, I like having the time during the summers to work a second job that I still like. Now, some people might say, well, that's they shouldn't be a teacher. They might be a lights out teacher, but that might be the reason. So it's difficult to judge somebody's why and not get caught up in the lofty piece of it. But I've had some interesting answers. But if I were to look them thematically, it's because somebody in a school setting or their parent influenced them to go into education. They looked up to that person, which is a whole nother topic if we have another 3 hours.
Yeah.
They looked up to that person
about my why.
and their parent was a teacher, and the love and respect and adoration that a kid has for their parent makes it a noble profession. Mm-hmm. Or a teacher that they had such a strong relationship or bond with that person that they impressed them so much as a human being that they wanted to go into that profession.
Yeah, I'm trying to think about my why now. How would I even answer that question? Or I don't know. How would you answer that question? Both of you. I'll think about mine while you're answering.
I've been talking. I'll go first, or I'll give up the mic to Chris. If you want me to
Yeah.
go, I'll go. Or I'll just walk right over them. My why is to create a better experience for educational experience for all those involved by being purposeful, acting with integrity, and building character. And mine comes from a very specific aspect of me growing up. It just took a little while for me to realize it and put words to it.
Love that. So my why changes.
Yeah.
Oh, changes. So when I became a leader, my why was to be the leader that I would have wanted, right? So I wanted to be a leader for educators that felt valued and supported and remove barriers for them and wanted them to just be awesome, but also like didn't shut them down, just wanted them to like really innovate. And I think that came from a place too of another why for me, which was I played the game in school and didn't find my love for learning until I got into college when I found my calling, which was this work. And I thought, man, if someone had if I had found that in a younger age, like what learning is about and why we go about this process of learning, I don't know what would have happened to me, but I thought it was kind of hard learning that when I was in college. Like, I didn't really work super hard up through high school. I kind of was there for the social stuff. I was there, I made the best of it, but I didn't find my passion until I was in school. And now as a father of 3 children in public school, now my why is to prepare them with what they need to be not just productive but happy. And so, there's a lot of other stuff in there too, but I guess it depends where I am and what I'm doing.
I like the idea. It can change. And I think that sometimes you don't even remember. Like if I really had to pinpoint my why, it was because that's what I was exposed to. A lot of women in my family were in education. So it was like, this is what I'm going to do. And that's not really that exciting of a why if you think about it that way. And I think there's lots of other things that I was really interested in, sciences and things like that. And so maybe I could have done something else. But I always liked the scientific aspect of things and being able to analyze things. And that's not really an answer that you always give, but I found a way to make it work. And I think the whole idea of it changing is that, I got to a point where I was getting so frustrated about things that were happening, what I thought were over my head, and I was like, well, I want to go and make an impact in a different way. And, then you go through the whole transition and realize, oh, wow, like you think that the person that you report to has all the power. And then you like move up and you're like, oh, wait, no. And it's always like, if only I was here, I could fix everything. And I think the realization is that you can't fix everything. But I really like the idea of removing barriers and like creating pathways for people and dealing with things that maybe other people don't want to worry about. They want to go and be engaged with the kids or the families. And so I'm happy to handle the data or this system over here because I'm good at it. And I'm going to make this for you so that your job is easier for you. I like the idea of taking care of the people, taking care of the kids and the families.
Yeah.
So how's that not exciting?
It is now.
I was going to say, that's perfectly
You found it.
Yeah,
right?
Again, see, it just took me a little bit to get there. I'm a wordy processor. It takes me a little while to get there. And that takes me to this other thing I wanted to ask you guys about, which is like, so there's the question about how do you know when to deal with something yourself or when to escalate it? Or how do you like just finding that balance between, and I guess this is maybe when you like it to be reported to you or when you're the one reporting something up. But I always find it very difficult to not get in the weeds and give enough information when I'm sharing a concern, escalating something, but also being concise. And I just, every time I'm like, I'm gonna hit the high points. I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna go boom, 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 get my thoughts together. And then every time it just seems like I, write people a dissertation. So, and I know that it just kind of depends on, are you a nuts and bolts detail oriented person? Are you like a big picture person? And, I don't really know. I think sometimes I can toggle between both, but yeah, how do you guys handle that when you're trying to figure that out for yourselves or when people come to you?
I'm still trying to figure it out and be very honest.
So I guess that's comforting. It's not
I guess from a teacher perspective, right? Like what I need from people is, and maybe it's my style. I just need to know, like, what are you struggling with, and what is the impact on kids? Like, how is it impacting your day-to-day work? Because if you boggle me down with details, you'll see it on my face. I get very, I get lost in the weeds, and I just need to know very simply, like, what are you trying to do? What will it accomplish, and how can I help you do it? What do you need? What supports do you need from me? I guess what I'm struggling with in a bigger district is that question of when do you relay? And I think it's been that transition for me, whereas I used to have to not as much had to get relayed because of the position I was in. Now I'm in a different position where those relationships, I'm still trying to figure that out even 2 or 3 years in. Like, when are the times I need to go to my boss and what does he or she want to hear from me? And I can't say that I've figured that out. I know it's a learning curve for me still. Because I was brought up in the system where I just didn't need to do that. I didn't have to do that. Whereas now, there are times it's not as linear, right? Like, it's to be made. So I need to remember that, there are things that have to get relayed in. There are things my boss wants to do for me, but also he can't be in my building all the time. He's in lots of other schools. And so I have to be mindful of what he needs to hear because his job is very complex and broad. So I'm still working on it.
Yeah, I always worry, because I think, I'm overwhelming them. They probably have all these decisions to make. And then they're also thinking of, they're trying to move somebody along on a decision too at the same time, probably. And I always think, well, I don't want to overwhelm them with details because I know a couple people on the executive leadership where it's like, I've been told, hey, you gotta get to it when you talk to this person because they're going to shut down if you give them a laundry list of complaints. So,
I would say too, I guess this is maybe my preference as well, is when people come to me with problems or things they're struggling with, I want to know in simple terms what it is, and come to me with a few solutions too, like what I'm thinking about, because I don't live your job every day. I can't possibly imagine what that's like. So tell me what things you've considered, because I'm happy to think through that with you or ask you questions about or offer support and guidance or things I can do for you. But you can't catch me in the hall and put a problem on me and then wait for me to just have an answer for you on the spot. So, come to me with a couple things that you think, like, do you have a B, and a C of things that could be done? And then I can roll with that. Like, let me think about that. Let me see what I can do on my side, and I'll get back to you. But I guess that's another piece that I encourage my staff to do as well, is don't just come with problems, come with some potential solutions. So I know that you've thought through it and that I have some things that I can kind of digest and bat around in my brain.
100% on that,
Dr.
Chris.
Jones?
Yeah, the idea with problems and solutions, but it's also helpful, I find, if they tell me what they're looking for right off the bat. So do you have a question for me? Do you have a problem you need me to solve? Or are you just informing me?
Yeah.
And then it can be taken care of with a really easy sentence at the end. So if you need to inform me of something, and again, this is personal to me. If you need to inform me of something, throw it in a couple bullet points. If you can't throw it in a couple bullet points, then it's something longer that needs more of a conversation. And then at the end, just put, let me know if you need to know more. And that way, if I read the bullet points, I'm like, all right, I got the gist of it. I'm aware of it. And I can come to them for more. Great. But the problem, if you email me something, definitely put a couple solutions on there, because it shows ownership. Two, it allows me to support and or empower you to come up with your own solution. If one of those solutions is good, I'm just going to say run with it. I like it when teachers will come to me with an idea and say, hey, I tried this and this because I was trying to do this and I got this, rather than saying, hey, I'm thinking of maybe kind of doing this. Do you think I should do this or this? Just try it. Tell me what you do, and then let me know about it so that I can defend it if something went wrong, or I can praise it if it went right, or support it if you need to take it a little further. But it's definitely, there's that relationship communication thing again, because that's definitely a personal preference. I know that I struggle with this personally, because sometimes it seems like a moving target, and that has to do with, how much I communicate to staff, how much they need or want to hear, depending on the topic. Sometimes I've created documents that they can contribute to, or I have them contribute to a form, and then I filter that through on a document and answer all the questions they have, and so forth, for whole school things. But communicating up to my superior, anything out of the ordinary operation of a school. But somebody might be sitting out there that has a superior that is a micromanager that's interested in more than just something that's out of the ordinary. And then you just have to communicate to a level that they're comfortable with. But that comes through communication. That comes through the relationship that you have with the person.
I think you make a good point, though, Chris. Like, I'm going to steal that with in my future communications, is actually telling my boss or whoever it is what I'm actually looking for. Because I don't think I do that often. Like, I'll call and
it's like,
say,
what's the ask? End with the ask.
Yeah, like, what are you asking for? Because you're right. If we're not clear about that, you've had staff come to you and they'll complain about a situation with another staff member, and you're like, so are you just venting to me? Do you want me to step in? Like, what are you asking me to do? So it's relationships, it's communication, it's also clarity. Like, let's name the thing we're looking for, because there's never enough of it. We have so much work to do and people to connect with. And I think just being intentional is something I'm gonna use. So thank you.
I think people don't realize, like, so if it's just a like FYI email, to just say, hey, respond if you have questions, or no response needed unless you have questions. Like, how freeing is that when it's, I don't have to respond to this email, how much that's doing for the other person? Because, when somebody emails you something and you think, well, I've got to read into it a little bit to figure out what they wanted. And then you have to do all of this additional processing, and then it's more likely to get pushed down in your inbox, and then you feel bad because you didn't get back to them and all of that. So I don't know if other people have those kind of things where you want to help and you want to provide support, but it's overwhelming for you in the moment. So you're like, it takes too much work to make a decision and give an answer right now, so I'm going to go do something else.
It's true. And if you're like me and I think educators, administrators, like, we want to do well by our people. Think about how much time and energy I spend wondering, like, what are they looking for me to do here? Do they just want me to read this? Do they want me to are you asking for permission? And so I just think that would not remove all the barriers, but it would at least be helpful if we would just know the thing we're looking for in our.
If we have fewer emails that we feel obligated to respond to, that helps. It makes a difference.
Yep.
Yeah.
Or
that clarity piece. I do a small practice in an effort to treat people as individuals and give everybody a chance. When we're talking about larger decisions to make sure that everybody's needs are being met. So I only communicate with my staff once a week in an email, and I do it through an internal memo. But in each memo, I have a section that's called burning questions or concerns. That's an optional survey that they fill out that I get alerted once they fill it out and submit it. And so the staff member that needs to reach out to me, but's not sure how to reach out to me, or that just needs to communicate with me more than that once a week in the memo. Now, I mean, I obviously, if something comes up, I do individual emails, but I have that optional survey, and I have another optional survey that's a weekly check-in where they rate how they're feeling, and they talk about, are they getting enough sleep? How are they doing physically, mentally, stuff like that. But a lot of times I'll find that the questions that funnel to the burning questions or concerns are more of the complaints that they want to hear back from. And that's a little helpful for me to sort and to give people an opportunity to, sometimes it is to vent, because I'll email them back and they'll say, oh, well, no, that's all right. I was just, I'm upset about it. But it gives people the opportunity to be heard and to feel comfortable in speaking their mind.
Yeah.
what do you do with those responses? Like, what are your action steps when you get responses to that survey?
Well, it automatically loads a spreadsheet for me that I keep track of, that I color code, and to make sure that I'm getting all of them, so they turn green when I respond to them. But I respond to every one, and the first thing I say is, hey, thanks for checking out the survey. If it's something easy, I make it happen. If it's something that's more complicated and I need to talk to them more, I say, hey, can we, touch base on this? We really need to talk about this a little more. But I respond to every single one that comes in.
So I know we're past the hour. So do either of you have any parting wisdom on any of the topics that we talked about?
If I had any at all, I think I already got rid of it in the past hour.
Yeah. There's so many specifics I could get into, but well, thank you both for being here. Where can people go to connect with either of you? Well, we'll go one at a time.
You can find
You've been
me
tagged. You're
on Instagram and X. It's at Principal Dodge 1. That's where you'll find me.
All right.
Same here. Instagram, X, pretty much anywhere. Dr. C.S. Jones. And yeah, that's the best way to get me, I guess, or Dr. Christopher Jones on LinkedIn or anything like that. But
and check out the Seeing to Lead podcast too.
Yes, I didn't. I was good. I didn't plug that, but definitely check out the Seeing to Lead podcast. You've got to plug it.
This is the time to plug it.
I know, right? I'm never good at plugging stuff, but check out the Seeing to Lead podcast. We have great conversations like this, and I call it the podcast helping solve leaders' everyday's issues. But Seeing to Lead.
Well, that's a wrap, but not the end. Next step, be sure to take action on something you heard here today. Hey, thanks for listening to the Seeing to Lead podcast. If you would like to connect for any reason, email me at drchrissj@gmail.com or catch me on Twitter at Dr. C.S. Jones. If you've gotten any value from the Seeing to Lead podcast today, you can help me and other leaders create a world-class environment through a teacher-centric approach by subscribing to the show, leaving an honest rating or review, and sharing this episode on social media with your most valuable takeaway. Also, one last thing. Have you had a chance to pick up my latest 5-star rated book yet? Grab your copy of Seeing to Lead anywhere you buy books or at seeingtolead.com. That's seeingtolead.com, where you can learn more and continue to improve. Now go have a successful week.